Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is episode 1 of our 4-part State of the Security Team webinar series. Today's episode is called The Evolving Security Landscape and Its Impact on Security Strategies. For some more context, Logarithm, in partnership with Dimensional Research, recently conducted a global research project called the 2024 State of the Security Team. We surveyed executives and security professionals at medium to enterprise companies for over 20 countries. And in the report that we created from the research, we share insights into how global organizations can adapt amidst digital challenges and statistics around resources, budget, breaches, strategic alignment, and more. So in each of these webinar episodes, we will share findings from specific parts of the report and dive deeper into more strategic conversations around the topics. Be sure to check out the full report linked below. And with that, I will pass things over to our speakers for today, Andrew and Kevin.
Thanks, Delaney, and welcome everybody. My name's Andrew Hollister, and I'm the CISO and VP of Logarithm Labs.
And hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Kirkwood. I'm Deputy CISO for Logarithm, and happy to be joining the discussion today.
Great. So let's get to it, shall we, Kevin? I think we firstly want to talk about the rate at which cybersecurity strategies are changing, and in the survey we discovered that 95% of companies in fact have changed their security strategy in some way in the last 12 months, and there were a variety of reasons for this. Amongst others, we perhaps couldn't have a webinar in 2024 without mentioning AI. And perhaps to nobody's surprise, that was right at the top of the list. Kevin, what's your thoughts on AI as a driver of change in cybersecurity strategy?
It's a driver in both attack and defend. So if you look at this across the board, you'll see a lot of companies looking out and saying, okay, so we've seen a very good uptick in terms of the quality of phishing emails, as an example, or other methods for doing some kind of social engineering, whether that be building a web page that looks or mimics exactly what the web page is of the intended target, all the way down through to representing an individual and doing a good job of pretending to be, say, Andrew Hollister, as an example. And so we've seen that on the attack front. On the defend front, I think a lot of the companies are putting the AI stamp on just about everything that they can think of from a defend perspective, but it's going to be about how do we get to a better decision matrix, a situation where we can improve the ability of the defender to actually make rational decisions based on what they see. So it'll help in the analytics front. It may help particularly or some in the development as well. And so it's how are we playing that game, and we have to play catch up at the same time.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good points. And I think a useful way I've come across of thinking about this is kind of security of AI, security from AI, which is what you've just touched on here, and then security by AI. And I think there's these three quite unique aspects, i.e., as a user or an adopter of AI, I really need to think about that as a new and additional attack surface that I didn't have before. And we've already seen some of the consequences of not understanding how to secure these types of models from some pretty significant industry names. You've touched on security from AI, i.e. that threat actors are using AI. Notably, we've seen it in phishing. I haven't seen a lot of evidence of threat actors using AI extensively beyond phishing. And in fact, I think Trend Micro did a report not so long ago that suggested the defenders are in fact a little ahead of the attackers at this point in time, which is perhaps a rather unusual position for us to be in, wouldn't you say?
very unusual position for us, frankly.
Yeah, yeah. And then I think on the security by AI, it is it's interesting to see, like you say, AI is just being kind of tagged everywhere. And a lot of what I've seen, at least, is some kind of variation on a chatbot. So I'm really hoping we see more innovation on the product side beyond, being able to go and chat to an LLM that's a bit educated in your space and really see what the kind of art of the possible is. I think the other piece here, people are perhaps concerned, security leaders are concerned about it because AI has been adopted in the mainstream so incredibly quickly. We've talked about shadow IT for a long time. Now we've kind of got shadow AI, if you like. I think organizations are starting to go down this route. I need to address it with policy and with education and awareness, so that we're not leaking our PII or IP and so on, and that the technology can be used in a way that's really safe.
Yeah, that's a great point. I worry about the amount of intellectual property, the IP that's been released out in the wild. I mean, we've seen examples of it with Samsung and their remote programming, but it's everybody's looking at it saying, oh, I can improve my code, so I'm putting my code out into a repository that probably you shouldn't be sharing, because that code becomes part of somebody else's source at some point. I guess it's the new wave of open source, maybe.
that's an interesting way to look at it, Kevin. So perhaps switching gears a little bit here, we could perhaps talk about AI and the changes that might engender all afternoon. But perhaps changing gears a little bit, when we think about regulation, this was number two in our survey as events that have prompted a change in the cybersecurity strategy. And again, I was in a presentation recently where the presenter said they were seeing multiple compliance changes worldwide on a daily basis, which I knew there was a lot of change, but that statement surprised me, quite honestly. But that compliance is changing that much, that there are changes to track every single day. And with that level of change, particularly for larger organizations, particularly for organizations in sectors like healthcare, perhaps finance and so on, you've got both governments and their industry bodies trying to grapple with the fast changing threat landscape and trying to establish a baseline of compliance with some kind of standard. And what do you see, Kevin, when you think about this area, the pace of change? Do you feel like it's speeded up?
I absolutely do, and I think it's very much a knee-jerk reaction in terms of how we go about putting these regulations in place. So if you look at the Balancing Act in the U.S., you saw CCPA that followed on the heels of GDPR in the EU. In the UK and in the EU, you're seeing NIS2, and then you have the federal government in the US saying this is a really good idea. Let's do something here, and trying to put government regulations in place by fiat, right? So I want to protect the data. So how do you go about doing that? Well, I think the answer is the government doesn't know, but they're looking at it saying this is a problem. We need to fix it. Somebody needs to fix it. And apologies if I borrow a George W. Bush reference. So we need to build a coalition of the willing. Well, we kind of do actually need to build that coalition of the willing. We need the private sector to actually lead public sector down the path of getting us to a point where we've got data regulations that make sense, that we have regulations that aren't so encumbersome that you can't do business. And then at the same time, you have enough protections in place that it makes sense and individuals are protected. I just released a thing on Dataversity where I was looking at those regulations specifically and thinking about, okay, so if I've gotten to a point where I'm protecting this, what's to keep us from protecting uh, foreign entities from actually buying up private individual information? So that impacts healthcare, it impacts financial, it impacts pick your poison. And so it's how do you get to that point where you put the right level of national regulation in place, whether that's NIS2 or GDPR or something in the US, and get it to a point where it actually delivers the kind of value and the kinds of protection that you need, not just a heavy-handed stick that basically says, I'm going to fine you $600 million if you breach data. So it's a fun topic for me, and it's a constantly changing, constantly shifting, evolving area that we need to pay significant attention to.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And I think there's some element of a rising tide lifts all the ships, and that if I pay attention to my own compliance, and I know my suppliers are doing the same, we're all more secure together. But it is no doubt challenging for organizations to keep up with, and not least when different compliance regulations overlap, which many of them do to a great extent. Okay, maybe we'll move on to the next section here, and address, if I can find the slide, and address the where does responsibility for breaches actually live? And I thought this was
I
a
really like this slide, Andrew.
Yeah.
You know why I really like this slide?
Go ahead.
Because it doesn't say anywhere on there Deputy CISO.
Can we address that next year in the survey?
Well, it does have no one person it's a team failure. Security member who may have been responsible. Okay, fine. I might be in there.
You might be in there somewhere. You might be. I was pretty encouraged by this though, because
yes,
it's very much the overwhelming majority found both the CEO and the cybersecurity leader, or the CEO or the cybersecurity leader, as bearing responsibility, which is really as it should be. I guess the question arises: well, if this is how it is now, where did it used to live? And the thing that kind of really springs to mind for me anyway is it used to live in IT. It was that thing that IT did, and was part of their overall remit. And I think the other place the blame mainly rested was generally with the intern. It was probably the intern who'd done something. And of course, famously, SolarWinds blamed the intern, and many others have gone down the same route of placing the blame perhaps on an inexperienced member of staff, a member of staff who's trying to do their job and perhaps took a shortcut in order to deliver a business outcome. But I think, and we'll touch on this, I think, through the rest of this episode and in future episodes, as cybersecurity has moved more into being recognized as a business risk, then I think much more of the right ownership has come about. And if I was going to poke at these results at all, I'd say I'd like to see that both the CEO and the cybersecurity leader jointly being responsible increase over the survey in the next kind of 1 to 5 years ahead of us.
Yes, I actually think it's kind of interesting. I was reading an article today, and it was talking about a senator calling out the CISO for United Health Group, and it said the guy has never been in a position of security leadership. He's never, done the foundational work. And that's a great point to make. You want to have security professionals at the top. You do want to have them be fundamentally responsible for, the foundation. But that was a decision that was made. That was a business decision that was made, right? That cyber leader knew the business well. There's nothing wrong with having a cybersecurity. In fact, you really want your cybersecurity leader to know the business and know the business well. You definitely do want them to understand the state of technology and state of security. And this individual does have that background, but he doesn't have that foundational leadership in the cyberspace. And so that was why the senator was calling him out. I thought that was unique and kind of flies in the face of this study. And I don't want that senator to set us back in terms of who is the appropriate individuals to hold responsible, because you do have that broken down very well in this slide. You want the right person and people to be held accountable. It's cybersecurity is a team event, right? It's not a one-person show. It's the entire organization has to be aligned to cyber across the board, and the cyber team has to be aligned to the business as well. And so that foundation and the fact that the CEO and the cyber leader are equally being held accountable in a lot of cases, very good. I don't think it's ever going to be just the CEO's fault or just the cybersecurity leader's fault. It is going to be a mix of decisions that were made that should not have been made the way they were made. And again, the other side of it is you can only protect so much without shutting down the business.
Yeah. No, it's very much a risk decision, isn't it? And I think that this evidence and others indicates that most do really recognize cybersecurity is a business problem, and the responsibility therefore must lie with the business leaders. And to your point, the CISO is a business leadership role. But I think overall a successful cybersecurity program really does need sponsorship from the CEO down, and that's perhaps where things can also go astray. That back to it's IT's responsibility. There's some kind of cybersecurity program sitting there that's not going to be successful from a kind of strategic perspective in everything from kind of security awareness to patching or for example to prioritization. If you're a software company like we are, we've seen how it goes in the industry when features are prioritized over security defects, and trying to make that risk trade-off there. It's like you're mentioning, it's not really a null-sum game.
Absolutely not. Love the fact that you wove in a little bit of the DevSecOps or AppSec in the middle of that conversation, because fundamentally you start with that foundation and you build on that foundation throughout the entire organization as you're building software or you're putting new product in place, or if you're thinking about who do you partner with, you want to have that same fundamental stack built up so that that they're building from a secure foundation all the way up through. And at the top, the CEO is aware of the responsibility, the CISO is aware of the responsibility, and plays heavily in this conversation about software that's been built and delivered for customer consumption.
Yeah, agreed. And elsewhere in the report, I won't bring up the slide here now, but elsewhere in the report, we discuss how often a team should meet, how often reporting should be done on the cybersecurity strategy. What's your thoughts on this? Can we actually put a time frame on this? Is that meaningful?
But fundamentally, I'd say the answer is anytime you have a major shift. We started this conversation with, here are the things that drove change to the strategy. I would say that anytime you have significant change, you need to adapt your strategy and you need to share that up, right? You need your board to be aware, you need your CEO to be aware, your leadership team across the board to be aware. That's a major change. But then fundamentally, you can also adapt on an annual basis if things are calm and sedate. Are they ever calm and sedate?
Sure about that one, Kevin. I don't think I've ever heard you say those two words in connection with cybersecurity before.
Well, you also have heard me curse about hope, and oh, I'll just leave that alone at this point. Hope is not a strategy, trust me.
Absolutely. No, and I agree, really. I think this has a lot to do with where you are in the kind of maturity of your cybersecurity program overall. It has to do with the size of your organization. But in any case, I think cybersecurity should be on the weekly or bi-weekly agenda of senior leadership within the organization as a business risk like any other. And in terms of the teams themselves, we saw in our survey that nearly 50% meet either daily or weekly, but we did also see that teams are still struggling to communicate with senior management in a language that they understand. And
Yes.
interestingly, that there's a lack of understanding of compliance and the requirements of compliance at a senior leadership level. Which, when we think about again where we started here, this question about the pace at which regulation is changing, I think it's also challenging for leadership to stay abreast of what's really required and demanded of them.
Absolutely. No, spot on.
Okay, well, I think we're more or less at time here. Delaney, we'll hand it back over to you.
Yes, great. Thank you both so much for that conversation. And thank you so much to our audience for joining in today. As I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, be sure to check out the full State of Security Team research report, which is linked below, as well as the additional resources linked there for you. Keep your eyes out for our next episodes in this series coming soon. Connect with us on social media with the links here, and reach out to info@logarithm.com if you have any other questions. Thanks, everyone. Take care.